Hello, everyone. My name is Holly Bass. I'm the National Director of Turnaround Arts at the Kennedy Center. We are live and broadcasting from the ancestral and unceded lands of the Piscataway, Nacotchtank, Pamunkey, and Powhatan. In this place currently called Washington, D.C., we honor those who are stewards of this land and continue to reside on and steward this ancestral land. We'd like for you to let us know who you are and where you are by dropping your information in the chat. And we're going to also share a link to nativeland.ca, which is an amazing link if you are interested in learning more about the original inhabitants of the land you occupy currently. We have a really exciting program for you. So let's get into some art with a performance by Damani Rhodes featuring Tinua Rhodes and Paul Willis. Board of Education, and that's B-O-R-E-D, Board of Education.
Lord, don't let me be misunderstood. I'm working like mechanic, catch me up in the hood, putting oil in the engine, see this driver super good. And I'm trying to be the difference, cause they can see the difference between chronicles and scriptures. As we chronicle these scriptures, thoughts hang by the portrait, for left of where those ships were. Got a penny for your thoughts, cause I'm a big tipper, yeah. I feel like this destiny is all. Impact often be testing my resolve. I feel I should book a session just to talk. Somebody, the American dream. Anybody, everybody can get it. But let's be more specific. See, poverty's the issue, and most seem to have the sickness. And in recovery, they still showing symptoms. Walking through a food desert for 40 days and 40 nights. See, that's when the devil tempts them. I mean, that's when the system pimps them. Like, hands up, boy, you fit that description. Or he needs meds, he can't pay attention. Or please stand up and head to detention. With no good things aforementioned, just henchmen with hypertension.
I used to spend all day writing notes in the front. We try to cheat the test, now we pass over lunch. Business plans over brunch, that's networking. I was mentored, now I mentor the next person. Board of Education, cause I wish I knew more about paying taxes and running for school boards. Start an LLC or be an entrepreneur. I needed teachers like me to tell me to score. We living in a system working like it's supposed to.
Using school data
to build prisons to hold you, erase you from the books. Different stories they told you, like they ain't stole you, shipped and sold you. But now it's time to change all of that. Team Trusty Roads, making policy that slaps. It's imperative that we shift the narrative, and our kids don't pick it up from where it is.
That was awesome. Thank you, Damani, for setting the tone for us. And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome the president of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, Deborah Rutter.
Hey, Holly.
Hi, Deborah.
Great to see you.
Always great to see you.
I wish we could be together, but I think that'll happen pretty soon. I'm feeling the groove here. And that was a fantastic way to start. Thank you so much, Damani. That was the team and the message, absolutely fantastic. I'm just here to welcome you all. I'm not going to take much time, just to say greetings. It's good that we can do these gatherings in such a way, because actually we reach more folks and we can be together in this space. I do look forward to the time when we can share ideas and thoughts and music and art together in person. I want to say thank you to Vanessa Thomas for being the leader of this series of art summits. Creativity is something that is never wanting in Vanessa's life, but she had extra demands on Art Summit this year. So thank you, Vanessa. And I know she would want to say thank you also to Caitlin and Natalie for their support. Without encouragement from the Annenberg Foundation, we probably would have thought about this completely differently, but our great friends at the Annenberg Foundation encouraged us to be creative, encouraged us to expand our horizons. And as a result, we have a whole series of conversations today and into the future. So stay tuned, watch this space. I also want to say thank you to Jordan Lasalle. Many of you may not have met Jordan yet. She's our new VP of Education, and she has been a fantastic colleague to me almost the whole time I've been here at the Kennedy Center. So she knows us from the ground up and has been a fantastic leader over the last 15 months and before that as well. So I'm going to pass it off now to Jordan and ask her to get us started with the conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. I am loving these combinations of the virtual, the live, moving it all together. It's really thrilling. Thanks for being here.
I look forward to the conversation.
Me too. Thanks. Hi, y'all. The Education Division has learned so much from Art Summit gatherings of the past, and we are thrilled to be embarking on this one as well. I'm fortunate to lead incredible colleagues who have connected with folks across the country to really listen to how the Kennedy Center can support your work. And even more moving is how we are pushing ourselves to adjust course and act on those questions, recommendations, and requests that we're hearing in a way that honors your input and also upholds our mission towards equitable access to high quality arts education for all. I look forward to hearing from the moving participants in this Art Summit conversation and from our inspirational host, one of our colleagues in education, Holly Bass. Back to you.
Hi, Jordan.
Hi, Holly.
I like that bookshelf situation you have going on back there.
Thank you so much.
Good.
Appreciate it.
Our theme this year comes from a Maya Angelou quote that essentially says, once you know better, then you must do better. And I think our next speakers just exemplify this philosophy and ethos so well. I'm excited to introduce this conversation between Dreama Gentry, the Executive Director of Partners for Education, and the 2021 National Teacher of the Year, Juliana Urtubey.
Everybody, I'm Dreama Gentry, Executive Director of Partners for Education. And I'm a white woman, blonde hair, got a purple shirt on today, and I'm wearing glasses. And I'm talking today from my office in Berea, Kentucky.
Hi, everybody. My name is Juliana Urtubey. I am the 2021 National Teacher of the Year. My pronouns are she and her. I am a Latina woman with dark brown skin and big green earrings on, shoulder-length hair. And I am also joining you from my office, full of garden extraordinaire behind me. So we have some bees and some hummingbirds. I live in Southern Nevada, which is Southern Paiute land. And I'm just really happy to be here with you all. So I wanted to get us started. The Art Summit is about knowing better and doing better. And we wanted to take this moment to pause and reflect in education. So, Dreama, could you tell us a little bit about your context? Who do you work with? Who do you share hopes and dreams with? What are some things that have sustained you through this last year and a half?
Yeah, thank you. What has sustained me is the young people and the people in communities that have remained surrounded and connected to young people. I do my work in Appalachian, Kentucky. I'm from Appalachia. I was the first in my family to go to college. And I made it to this point because of community and those that supported me. And part of my work is creating opportunity for Appalachian students to ensure they're successful. And so the work of Partners for Education is around creating opportunities for young people from cradle to career. So we do home visiting and families of kids that are 3 to 6 months old. But then also working with young people in communities to ensure that there's those supports and interventions to support opportunity and success. And we define success as having the opportunity to achieve a 2 or 4 year degree, because data tells us that those with a degree have better economic mobility, but they also have better health outcomes and better fulfillment outcomes. And so our work here in Appalachian, Kentucky is to provide that cradle to career support for all young people. What about you? What about the context and how you're doing your work?
Yeah, so I'm a special education teacher and I work in Las Vegas, Nevada. I typically work in schools where the majority of the population are first generation students and families, kids of color, kids from all over Central and South America, Cuba, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico. We also have a large population of students from the Philippines and a strong Black African American population. And so I work with students who have learning and thinking differences. I work to help them build the bridges that they need to thrive. Part of the work that I do is at my last school, I started a school garden, and that school garden was designed not only to beautify the school and bring in murals and have the school reflect who our community was, but also have a physical space on school campus where families and students and teachers got to design the environment based on what our community needed. And so it transformed unused grass areas and dirt areas in our school into spaces where we worked side by side, where we cultivated not only nutritious fruits and vegetables for our community, but also the relationships needed to do what I call a joyous and just education design, where we're really making sure that children can be themselves in their educational spaces, where families have a direct, comfortable, trusting environment where they can show and share their gifts and talents. And just because teachers are working together with community to make sure that we're not only addressing the inequities that lie in our school, but that we're working to redesign them so that they're based on our students' humanity.
You know, it's interesting that the garden piece reminds me of a cornerstone of our work is that place matters. The place that we do the work, the land. There's a quote that I think of, and I saw it on the wall of the Smithsonian's African American History Museum. And it said, places where identities are created, tested, and reshaped over time. And so our work at Partners for Education, the work is taking place in Appalachian, Kentucky. And if you look at statistics, Appalachian, Kentucky is often said to be one of the hardest places to live in the nation, you know, with the statistics. But as somebody who is from here, you know, what I realize, it's a place of opportunity, it's a place of community and of connection. And so a lot of our work at Partners for Education is connecting young people to the place and helping them through the arts to really think about their own identity and to really test, reshape, and create that identity. So much, I think, of the work of educators is really around how do we provide young people with roots and wings. roots that connect them to who they are, their identity, their place in their community, and then wings to actually go toward opportunity and the opportunity they themselves want to be moving toward. And so I think one of the things that we learned during COVID was that we have to be more creative in creating the containers and the space for that work around identity to take place. And so it just resonates with me. The garden was a space, a physical space. One of the things that we had artists do during COVID was to create through Zoom the space for young people to actually do a play where they told their own stories about their own work and their own identity. And so it's been interesting. That's been one of the challenges for us, is how do we during COVID create new places for young people to do the work?
Absolutely. When I hear you talk about roots and wings and having a place, I think about the storytelling that goes with having that place. For my nomies, we call ourselves nomies. We're gnomes who are homies and nomies. That place symbolized so much more than just healthy fruits and vegetables. It symbolized a place where kids could learn in the way that felt right for them. In a garden, everybody has a place and a role, and all of those roles are equally important. And so I think about place and also all of the opportunities that we have to design place to include others, to welcome others, to really uplift the elements of others that maybe outside of this place aren't, but in this place they are. And so by doing so, we get to have autonomy. And I think about how critical autonomy is for everybody, but particularly for children, right? So something that we hear often is autonomy is this self-determination where you get to create your story, right? And so one of the things I think about a lot that happens in schools is schools often, for order, have this imposition of compliance. And by doing so, sometimes what it looks like is a policing of our students. And when we're working with students who have historically been part of communities that have been over-policed or criminalized, there are many examples, but one of the examples that's coming to mind right now is the immigrant community, first-generation families, and anti-immigrant policies and sentiments that really have policed and criminalized our community. And so when you have a school space that does the opposite, that says, over here, we see you for your gifts, for your energy, for your devotion to your family and your children's well-being. And that's something that we want to co-create with you. And when we do it with a really deep sense of community interconnectedness, that's when we learn and grow the most. I mean, I think my students grew and learned a lot in the garden, but I think that I did as a person and as an educator even more so, because it made me very careful about being observant, being reflective, learning through intuition and learning through community. So as we wanted to expand, it was the community who had the voice in what we did, when we did it, how we did it, why we did it. And I think that that's one of the things that made it so powerful. Dreama, how does your organization make sure that the student and community voice is really highlighted and centered?
It's core to what we are. And I think that the first thing we do is a technical piece, is when we hire staff, when we hire people that will be in roles of leadership with young people, we try to prioritize hiring people from the place and who have the same shared lived experiences. We also really think about how do we engage community members in formal roles with young people to really broaden young people's horizons. So we have a core group of teaching artists, and our teaching artists are all folks from the physical places that have the shared experiences. And honestly, many of them didn't really think of themselves as artists. We have a quilt maker she was a grandma, and she does these beautiful quilts, but we paired her with a artist who was on a teaching roster and helped her see how that the quilting could actually be tied to elementary math classes, right? So now she goes into the elementary math classes, she quilts with the kids, and they learn fractions. And, you know, this grandma never thought of herself as a teacher or an artist. And so part of it is actually helping those culture bearers in the community to start to see that they have so much to give, and that their work really is art, and that it can be used to engage. We have another teaching artist who's a blacksmith, and he had never really thought about how his work as a blacksmith could be transformed into sculpture that kids could actually start being engaged with. And we have a problem in our community. So many of the young men feel really disengaged. But the idea of working with a blacksmith and hammering and having fire and doing that really was a way to engage them. And thinking about your piece around autonomy, I think that we have so many young people that they have been marginalized. I'm thinking of a group that we have that live at the Appalachian Children's Home, and they live there because either they have done things to be removed from the home, or they've lost their homes, they've lost their parents, they're homeless. Working with a young group of mainly young men there with sculpture, and how they could create this sculpture that would retain and stay in this place long after they were. And they each designed the birds that symbolize themselves, that were part of that sculpture. So I do think it really is around recognizing that community members have gifts and talents, especially around the arts, that if we can engage them in the schools and create the opportunity, that's powerful, right? Yeah.
It is so powerful to recognize how much strength and resilience and just vision community really has. And there's no community that doesn't have it. It's just whether or not we are given autonomy in the spaces that we exist in to show it, to highlight it. And I'm thinking so much about art right now, this connection about how art is a vehicle for us to express our identities, for us to express our despair, but also our hope. You know, we both work in communities that have significant challenges. And sometimes those challenges get romanticized, or we don't let the people who are most affected by systemic inequities tell their own stories, but how art is always a tool for that. And if we are deep rooted in our conviction about art being a tool of autonomy, art being a tool that connects the community, then we see art in so much more, right? So our students, every summer we would plant a tunnel in one of our garden beds that was on the ground. And that tunnel was sunflowers, and we spread out the seed planting so that you could walk through a tunnel that slowly got bigger. And we would take pictures of the kids going through the tunnel. And then we would give the students those pictures. And that to me was really significant art. Not only did the students help plant the sunflowers, those were sunflower seeds that were harvested previously from our garden. So they were second and third generation seeds. There's a lot of symbolism in that. And then the students going through the tunnel and just capturing their face the second they came out of that tunnel, you know, is a good way to show what happens when our places are full of art, when our places are full of student voice, children's voice, community voice, and where people can truly be themselves. This idea of sharing quilt making for geometry, but also for story preservation, is really powerful. It's really powerful. And it teaches us that there's key ingredients in space making, no matter where we are in this world, right?
And I think I love that. I could just vision the young people coming through that tunnel. But I also want to remind us, and I love your joyous and just phrase, that it is important that we do these activities and programs and services, and we engage the community at the local level to support young people and give young people these opportunities. But I think it's also important that we share what we learn with policymakers, with philanthropy, because too often we try to just put the Band-Aid on and make it better for the young people. But I think we also have to be agitating and disrupting the systems that create these inequities in your place and mine. And that's something that we're really starting to think more about. And we have shared young people's voice at national convenings and providing young people a chance to actually speak and talk about what they think, that what they need, versus us just sharing our perceptions. And so I do think that part of the piece of this work is, how do we then use this work to disrupt big inequitable systems? And you have this platform now this year as National Teacher of the Year. How have you been thinking about disrupting some of these systems?
Absolutely. I think that's why the just was so critical in the joy. We need to return to the joy. And the joy is more than just happiness, right? Happiness is fleeting. Joy is this deep conviction that I am who I'm supposed to be. And I have a role in my community that I'm supposed to have. And then the just is exactly what you said. We are operating in unjust systems that are exclusionary, that don't allow us to show who we are and to develop those identities. And so, there's a multitude of platforms. The first is, really ensuring that our language matches the brilliance of our children. So, for example, students who come to our country speaking other languages, I consider them linguistically gifted, because they are. If you have another language that you're bringing to share with others, you are gifted. And so helping reframe how we see those populations, to me, is really critical, including things like bilingual education to support maintenance of identity and language. And then also encouraging other teachers to see themselves as leaders from their spaces. Having a deep conviction about why we do the work that we do, and creating the relationships where we have direct input with policymakers. And there is a collective force behind those things. Right now, we're really working to make sure that the ESSER funds, all the COVID relief funds that are going to the schools, are used in the ways that are going to feed and supplement not just our students, but our teaching force too. We're working to not only diversify our teaching force so that it is inclusive and representative of the communities, but also to prepare and support all teachers through this journey of identifying inequities. They are pervasive. They are in our routines and practices, and we have to do the really hard work internally and collectively. And doing so by channeling the voices of our students, echoing them. So whenever I get the chance to present, I always read letters that my students wrote. I always have anecdotes that show who my students are and how these spaces transform. So we need to make sure that all schools, all teachers have the power to leverage the resources they need to reflect their communities in schools.
And I'll join with you on all of that. And especially, how do we create pipelines for local people to become educators in the schools? And I think I would add that we have to advocate for funding to support the arts. I do think that there's still this mindset of scarcity, where often arts programming is seen as an add-on or a plus or something that is not necessary and essential. And I know from my own experience, my family's experience, that the arts is often what saves young people, what provides an opportunity for young people to actually have hope. It's what gets them to show up at school. It's what keeps them engaged. And it's an essential. And I think, how do we advocate to ensure that that is seen as essential? And I think the other is that we think about how our schools work, how to ensure that it's not teachers here and community here. We bring them together. And I think that's the piece that you've done so well, is the garden. Really, we need gardens in all of our schools. as places to bring the community and the educators together. So those are the two I would add to that.
I love that. I love that. And I think we are all charged with this responsibility as adults who work with children to really love the arts and personify that in everything we do. I would not be the person that I am without literature. Literature connects me to my roots. I read in Spanish every day because not only is the language familiar and like my heartbeat, but it's also the stories of us, right? And so I think that I was able to help craft my story because of all the literature, right? When I walked around the school and I saw murals that I knew my students would look up and see themselves, see their culture, see their vibrancy, see their hope reflected, I know that those transformed our spaces. So I couldn't agree with you more how critical art really is, how critical art teachers, all the teachers who have this amazing expertise, how critical they all are to making our schools a place where everyone can thrive. And Dreama, I'm in awe of your work. I am so appreciative of being able to connect with somebody across the country who's doing work that really uplifts their community. And thank you for engaging in this conversation today.
And I've enjoyed it. And it does show how that the work we're doing is so similar because place matters, culture matters, and it's all about the young people. So thank you so much. And let's stay in touch. I think there's things we can do together.
You got it.
That was so beautiful. I feel like my heart is really full listening to that conversation. And I think it just exemplifies so many of the values and concepts that we hope to drive home today. Partly that it's about our own communities and finding those resources. We all have rich culture bearers, no matter where we are in this vast nation. Every community has resources that are potent and valuable and that will help young people connect to who they are and where they are and where they want to go. And so that was just like, it was so lovely and delicious. And also this idea of connecting together so that we're hoping that even though we are not in a physical place as we normally are with Art Summit, that even in this virtual space, we're able to connect together. And so, feel free to drop lines in the comment. That's why we ask where you are, in part, and also just to start thinking about, well, who else can I connect with? Who can I connect to? So many good, juicy details. I'm thinking about joyous and just, like, that's just so perfect. And that joy is different from happiness. I think that's really, really key. Because sometimes I think we think, oh, well, if children are just smiling and playing, then okay, that's good. But it's really something that's much more rooted and requires deep commitment and cultivation, like a garden, and so that idea that you work the soil so that the soil brings something forth and that there's joy in the process and joy in the outcome as well. So I could honestly go on and on about that conversation. So many thanks again to Dreama and to Juliana for your vision and for articulating just so many wonderful ideas and modeling a kind of collaboration that's community-centered and rooted for all of us. And now we have even more amazingness coming up. We are about to go into our youth panel. And when I tell you, I watched this panel and my mouth was like open for most of it just because the brilliance of these young people. I mean, I honestly am like, they should just be running everything, like just put them in charge and things will work out. That's what we really need. So I'd love to turn it over to our wonderful moderator, Emanuelle Sippy, who's going to kick off this conversation for us with the youth panel.
Hi, thanks so much for being with us today. I'm Emanuelle Sippy and I use she, her pronouns. I live in Lexington, Kentucky on Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Shawnee land, and I co-direct the Kentucky Student Voice team. I'm a white Jewish Indian femme woman wearing a brown tank top, blue and white checkered shirt. And today I'm here alongside a group of incredible education justice organizers. we're coming together to speak about the state of our schools and think about what it might look like to move beyond this moment of crisis towards a more just and equitable system. And we're going to start by telling you just a little bit about how we came to do this work of education justice organizing. And for me, that story is a pretty long one, but I'm going to try to give the short version. Basically, I grew up in a pretty liberal Jewish progressive bubble in Minneapolis, and had lived there from kindergarten through 6th grade. And in 7th grade, when I moved to Kentucky, I had a little bit of a culture shock. I was in a school that was very WASPy and very affluent. And I started to understand this concept of belonging and othering that had previously just been kind of an assumed thing for me, something that I didn't have to think so much about. And I started to identify with a political organizing and progressive narrative that my parents and my brother had really identified with, that I had never felt the need to think about explicitly or identify with explicitly. And so this really kind of marked a turning point for me in understanding what it meant to do organizing and what it meant to exist in places of belonging and othering. And I see this work of community organizing not only as a future-oriented thing, where we are working to bend an arc over many generations, but also as a way of creating an alternate universe of the present. And I think particularly in the midst of COVID-19, that's part of what has been so powerful. Through organizing, so many of us have been able to undo isolation, not only for folks we work with, but among our own teams and for each other. And so we're just so glad to be here together today. And I'm going to pass it to Yvonne next.
Hello, my name is Yvonne Mahesh. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the field director at Student Voice. I'm a 20-year-old South Asian person with black hair. I'm wearing a black shirt and sitting in front of a white wall. I'm calling in from Rochester, New York, which is on the traditional land of the Seneca Nation of the Haudenosaunee, to whom I extend my gratitude. I came into this work as somebody who did not enjoy being in school and did not feel served or heard in school. And I went to traditional schooling, traditional public schooling all the way through my 9th grade year. And in my 10th grade year, I moved to a school that was student-centered, project-based, rooted in community, community work and the real world. And that dramatic shift in my education was one of the most joyous experiences I'd ever had in my life surrounding education. And though there were barriers for me to get there, there are so many students who face so many different barriers to getting to that place of joy and freedom in their educational experiences. And so my commitment to this work is coming from a place of wanting every young person in this country, in this world, to feel a similar joy when engaging in educational experiences, whether that's in school, in their community, with their families, with their friends, in any context, really. And I'll popcorn it to Selma.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Selma Perez. I am a lead organizer with Art Turn, as well as a staff writer for an upcoming project with Amazon Prime. I use my pronouns are she, her, and I am in my mid-20s. I'm an indigenous youth from the Zapotec and Mixtec tribes from Oaxaca, Mexico, which is a southern state in Mexico. I was born, raised, and reside on occupied Otsugna, Quiche, Tataviam traditional Tongva territory, also known as the northeast part of Los Angeles, California. And I think when thinking about education justice and the work that I do, I was lucky enough to go to a school that really created a space rooted in culture, identity, and academic excellence. So from a very young age, a lot of the work that is done at that K through 12 school that I attended is a lot of work around liberation and consciousness and building that within our community, as well as ensuring that the programming and everything that is done in educational space is specifically created to serve the needs of the community where that institution or school is located. So community organizing is something that's been a part of me through my parents and through my family, but as well as my education experience at a school like Anahuac, which is an indigenous-based school. And I will popcorn it over to Mikitsli.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Mikitsli Herrera. My pronouns are she, her. I am a third-year student at UC Riverside studying sociology and work as a lead organizer with Our Turn and a member of the La Comadre Network. I currently reside and occupy Chumash and Tongva land, which is most commonly known as Los Angeles. I am a second-generation Mexican-American in my 20s and wearing a green shirt with light gold jewelry sitting in front of a light gray background. I got into education organizing from my mother, and being raised by a single mother who was dedicated to changing the education system that she experienced throughout her K-12 experience was really one that I didn't realize would be as life-changing as it was until I, was experiencing the inequity firsthand once I transferred schools in my junior year and experienced a positive, high school experience. I really understood the work and understood the need for having youth involved in the space. So it really sparked a different passion for me of being able to have students a part of the space. And so once I found Our Turn, I really knew that it was a space and community that I wanted to be engaged in, and found the motivation and the drive and the passion to be able to bring my voice in the space, and knew the importance of that. And I will pass it on to our next speaker.
Hi, my name is Sofna Jadenjai. I'm a sophomore at Cornell University, currently undecided, so I don't know what I'm studying. I'm wearing a pink shirt with a pink head wrap and a gold necklace. I'm a dark-skinned African American, and currently I'm with my family in Diourbel in Senegal. When it comes to the whole idea of fighting for educational justice, that was not something that I even intended on doing. I got into the fight by accident. It's almost like when you trip up and fall into a room. I remember I had taken a public speaking class that I really liked. And so I said, I was wondering to see if there was an organization where I could do public speaking. And so I remember I went on Google and I was looking up this organization, and I found one that was called Teens Take Charge. And when I first got to the meeting in TTC, I thought that all that I was going to be doing was just picking topics and speaking my heart out. I did not know what TTC was about. And so when I got to the first meeting and they started talking about segregation and integration and educational inequity, I remember sitting in that room thinking, what did I get myself into? And two, why are they talking about something that's in the 1950s when we're talking about 2000s? But then the longer I got into TTC, the more I began to see some of the ways in which the system was working that I never realized was impacting me as well. Because while I was in TTC, I was also in another program where I was having to go to class on Saturdays, and I was having to go to class during the weekends and after school in order to get extra education. And I did not realize that the reason why I was having to do that and having to give up my weekends was because of the fact that I was not getting the education that I deserved. And so when I got into TTC, and TTC showed me that I was to go to school on Saturdays is not normal. To go to school, after school, and during the summer is not normal. And that the only reason why I had to do that was because I was not being respected by the system. That's when I realized that there was something wrong with the way that this is. And part of being in TTC was that we had to go to different schools to talk to them about educational inequity. And with every school that I went to, I realized that depending on the racial demographic of that school, they either had resources or they did not have resources. And at some point, I sat back and I realized that this system was never built for all of us in the first place. And there's so many people who could have been successful who are not successful for the mere fact that they're not in a system that respects them. And so just like everyone else on this panel, I'm fighting for educational equity because I believe that everybody deserves a chance to be successful.
Thank you all so much. I don't know that I've ever done a round of such interesting intros. We're now going to transition a little bit into the meat of our conversation, and I want to frame this a little bit in thinking about the unfortunate, awful, but stark reality of daily dehumanization that occurs in our schools. Whether it is bodies being policed by school resource officers who are armed, or it is the fact that we can't move during class, that learning disabilities and differences are not respected or accounted for, whether it's the fact that we can't drink water or eat food freely, whether it's the fact that many of the buses we take to school are harming us with their fuels, or the fact that schools, particularly in the midst of a climate crisis that we're seeing is so stark in this moment across the Pacific Northwest, particularly schools that don't have air conditioning. When we think about dehumanization, it's not an overstatement to say that's not just about the curriculum or the pedagogies that are being employed, but is truly about every aspect of the education system. And every person on this panel is working to create a different kind of system, one that truly affirms the humanity of students, of educators, of cafeteria workers, of bus drivers, and administrators, of other folks in between. And so I want to pose the question of how you do that. To tell us a little bit more about what that looks like. What does it look like to create schools that recognize and affirm students' humanity? How are you participating in that kind of work? And what do you want people to know about it? Maybe we'll start with McKeitsley on this question.
Thank you for that, Emanuelle. I think there's a lot of different aspects to students' identity that our schools really aren't touching on. I even think about my own experience of how being a transfer student my junior year into a small school environment, I really transitioned smoothly now, being able to look back at that experience because of the support that I was given from my teachers and counselors. And within the first 2 weeks of me being at the school, choosing schedules, I had already met my college counselor and knew about all the resources that were available to me, which really shifted my whole experience of knowing that I could come to my counselor at any point with any question, or issue that I had, being able to talk through the experience and being able to just also gain a friend. I think that was like the biggest, just reflection for me. And I think having that, it really shifted, my understanding of knowing that, schools and communities can be built to help students succeed at the end of the day, and that they don't have to have, negative connotations, and all students don't have to have a negative experience. And if they do, how do we still bring light to the situation and bring light to knowing that changes can be made? For example, my junior year of high school, I didn't have the best history professor. And after, giving evaluations at the end of the year, that teacher was no longer at the school the following year. And students were actually able to give, feedback as to why they didn't feel like, their teaching style was the best. And, being able to actually have like that dialogue, I think is the most important, really, at the end of the day, bringing students to the table and bringing, their voices and their experiences to not only the classroom, but to the school community, and how, teaching them how they can get involved. I think there's, so many different ways that schools have done that, and can continue to do that. I think it's really a matter of being able to do it at a larger scale and doing it quickly. There's so many students who start, higher, or who don't start higher education because of the experience that they get in their high schooling. So I think being able to really get to the root as to why so many students, and specifically here in LA, so many students of color don't get those opportunities, or don't even, who don't know that those opportunities are available to them. So really just being able to bring more equity to the classroom and to the system overall.
Thanks. I love how you talk about gaining a friend. And one of the things that I think is most evident is that when we have students who are learning from teachers, but teachers who are also learning from students, that two-way exchange, where relationships and hopefully friendship is at the center, would really be revolutionary, even though it doesn't need to be. So Najara, let's go to you.
Do like what you just said, especially the aspect of creating an education system that respects and affirms the humanity of the students. But I've been in this fight for about 2 years now, and one of the things that I came to realize is that when it comes to the fight about educational justice, the whole community has to be involved. The people who are benefiting from the system and the people who are not benefiting from the system. But I realized that the deeper we get into the fight, though people who are benefiting from the system are only willing to fight to a certain extent. As in, when it comes to New York City, where I live, but the biggest problem that we had is that the school system is very segregated. And based off the color of your skin, you most likely do not have resources, or you do have resources. And when we first began to fight it, everyone in the city was like, we don't like segregation. We are against segregation. We believe that every student should be equal. And so let us all be in this fight together. But then when they begin to see that we actually had a chance of desegregating the school system, that's when they said, hold on, let me take a step back, because something about this is not right. And I realized that people are for integration and they are for equity, so long as it does not impact the privileges that they have. And so it turns into this question of, how do we create justice when the people who have the most power in creating justice do not want to give up that power in order to create a system that is actually justified for everybody? And so in New York City, as I said, the problem that we have is that the school system is very segregated. And depending on the color of your skin, you either do or do not have resources. And so we saw that because resources were tied to skin color, if we created a school system that was actually integrated the way that it should have been decades ago, this separation of resources is not going to exist, because you can't say half of this school gets resources and half of this schools do not get resources. You can only say half of the system gets resources and half of the system does not get resources. And so the organization that I was with, called Teens Take Charge, we created policies that was all about integrating the school system. Policies that said we should allow students to be in schools that does not separate them based off of skin, that does not separate them based off of ethnicity, and that does not separate them based off of the class that they are in. But the problem that we saw was that we created the policy that said that it should be based off of potential, what class you get into. But then the minute the policies got into the hands of the people who are able to change it, that's when everybody erupted in the city and said, no, we can't do that yet. Because the minute you do that, that means that my child will not be guaranteed a spot into this place just because I got into this school before. And so at the moment, we are currently fighting to figure out, how can we push this fight for justice and educational equity in a system in which the people who have the most power do not want to give up that power in the name of justice? If you have the answer, please do say so.
Thanks so much. So powerful. Teens Take Charge is doing incredible work, really transformative work, thinking about a tale of two cities and how to undo that. And I've learned so much from Sok Najara and others on their team. Yvonne, do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. And I think, Sok Najara, your point about giving up power and having people with power giving up power is so hard. And that's part of what the work that I do at Student Voice centers around. And at Student Voice, our ethos, right in the name, is to elevate the voices of young people. We have this deep belief that young people should be the determinants of our own futures and our own presents, our current realities. And that the way towards an equitable education system is by centering student voices as decision makers, as the people who influence these schools, these environments that that we are the primary stakeholders of. All decisions about education boil down to us receiving the effects of those decisions. And so, it feels almost logical, shouldn't we be a part of that decision making? Sort of like Mackenzie was saying, that students being able to voice their opinions about a teacher in a school, and then being able to have those opinions taken seriously, that's sort of the goal. That's what we're working towards. And so the work we do includes positioning students as decision makers, bringing students into adult spaces where the onus is on the adults to adapt their spaces to students and not for students to adapt themselves to adult spaces. But then also, as a national organization, knowing that there is no national solution to the daily dehumanization of students, and that education is so hyper-local and specific to the various communities that it exists in, that solutions can only really be generated by those living in those communities. So a lot of the work that I do and we do at Student Voice is, how do we support students as local leaders? How do we support students as national leaders? How do we support students as decision makers, organizers, storytellers of their own experience, rather than putting our focus on like the adults with the power, trying to shift that towards students? And very similarly, if anybody has the answer, would love that. But it's this slow but very meaningful process that I've found ourselves in, that just is rooted in spending time with other young people and talking it out and trying something out and failing, and then trying something new out and then failing, and then continuing to work until we get close to what we want. This process of inserting ourselves into places of decision making, and particularly students who are the most marginalized by the education system, giving those students the platforms and the space to make calls about their own educations. That's our goal, and sort of the future and the present reality that we're working towards.
Thanks so much. I've similarly learned more than I can say from Yvonne and the Student Voice National team. The Kentucky Student Voice team and Student Voice National were founded around the same time and have really developed alongside each other and worked closely together. And I think one of the things you made me think about just now is also this exploration, this continuous exploration that we've done together around the fact that we're not only able to speak to our own experience, but have expertise on these issues. We spend 35 hours a week in the classroom. We know these systems inside out. And Student Voice, just to concretize what it looks like for students to have this expertise, for example, wrote an incredible, long, thorough report that they presented a roadmap to the Department of Education around what it might look like to engage students meaningfully, equitably, and on an ongoing basis in decision-making through the DOE. So I just wanted to throw that out there, check it out, and also just that distinction being made in all of our work, that it's not only lived experience, but lived experience coupled with expertise. Salma, do you have stuff you want to add?
Yeah, definitely. So I think just listening to everyone's words, there's so much power in that. And I think I know from my experience going to an Indigenous-based school, community has always been at the center of everything we do, as well as understanding our relationship to one another. I think tracing back to what Mikitsu was speaking about, like really not only finding a friend in the space that you're in the environment, but really also, I think, as educators and those that are in those positions of power, it's also very necessary to recognize the ecosystem that's being created. And not just in the education space. I feel like that can translate to so many different spaces and different communities and within our own families. So this understanding of interconnectedness that we have to one another and our experiences. And also, I think a big emphasis that I grew up learning about was the right to autonomy and the right to sovereignty. And I think when we recognize those words and we recognize what that looks like, it's very specific to the communities. So again, I think going back to knowing that the only ways to find solutions to not only a broken system, but a system that was never designed for us, is to really allow us the flexibility to create beyond curriculum the physical environments that are necessary to students to be able to reach their full potential. So I think it's also a big part of having compassion and empathy for one another and for our youth and for our families as well. I think it's so much bigger than just going to a school on the day-to-day. It's also really important to build the relationships with the families, between the educators, the personnel. I know that was a big impact that I had growing up, was building relationships with my teachers beyond the classroom. I think another part of that is also equipping young people and equipping families to understand that there is an inherent issue, not just with the education system, but systems overall. And that there's this ongoing colonial violence that we still experience through policy, through funding. I know at our turn, we talk a lot about funding being an allocation of our values, and how that really is what funding represents. It's the value that we hold for anywhere that money is going. So I think recognizing that historically, not only has there been an imbalance, but there's been an erasure of identity and cultures and communities in order to continue, I think, a little bit of that privilege that was spoken about earlier, and really upholding that power dynamic. And again, I think those are results of colonialism and settler colonialism. I think another part that is coming to me right now is also thinking about our education space is so much more beyond than just the United States. I think also understanding that this is a global problem. Like, our education spaces are not serving our communities globally. And we very much can trace it back to the fact that there is a process of assimilation at place or at design for these institutions.
Thank you so much. Could not agree more. As we move towards the end of our conversation, although all of us could talk for hours, I want to just ask, in this moment where so many of us are begging and pleading kind of with our systems not to revert back to normal, or the conception of normal, what does it look like for you to ensure that doesn't happen? What do you want others to know as they navigate that challenge too? And maybe how are your organizations responding to this call and this need for a new normal, or maybe for us to even better abandon a kind of colonial, problematic, racist, white supremacist idea of normal, and move beyond that. Does anyone want to start?
I can go ahead and share since I ended before. I think the first thing that comes to mind is understanding that there is liberation at place. That's really where we need to strive to be, is in a place of liberation of self, to be able, again, going back to the autonomy, to be able to hold that autonomy for oneself. And I think teaching that to our youth, and again, teaching that to our families and our communities, and acknowledging what that looks like. I think it's also providing accessibility. I think really getting down to understanding that, you know, we need accessibility in all different forms. I think one of the biggest things that come to mind is definitely language. I think words have the ability to shape our environments. And so I think there's a need to not just revert back to the passive way of going about schooling and going about how we treat our students and treat our families and treat our community, but really understanding that there has to be like tools for communities to come together and have authentic dialogue, to also provide them with healing spaces, and the tools to be able to do that. I know for me, in my experience, I also was trained in Transcendental Meditation. And so I think that was really something that was integrated into my academic space in a way that really allowed me to learn more about myself and to be able to identify the different things that were happening. I think also acknowledging intergenerational trauma and how that looks like in our communities is very real, and ultimately should be something that our schools are looking at, to also see the impact and the harm that they have caused historically, knowing that we have the school to prison pipeline and so many other things that take place today that are, again, traumatizing and harming families, students, and even within our educators. And again, I think just going back to being rooted in empathy and compassion for one another.
Beautiful, thank you. Anyone else feel compelled to jump in? Maybe Sugnajara?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that COVID-19 created anything new. The only thing that it did was just show what already existed. Because I know that there are some people who I know whose brothers and sisters were not able to learn for weeks after COVID-19 happened because of the fact that they did not have internet connection, or the fact that they did not have a laptop or a phone or iPad or anything to learn. And so for weeks, they had material that they were not able to consume because of the fact that there was inequities in the system that was existing that was never addressed in the first place. And so when I think of COVID-19, when it comes to this whole idea of educational justice, I don't think COVID-19 created anything. If anything, it reminds me of the story of the three little pigs. And because you remember when the wolf came in and blew the house of the pig that had the straws, that house blew away and fell down. But then when he blew the house of the pig that had the bricks, that house did not blow down because of the fact that the foundation of that house was already strong before the wolf even came in. In this case, the straws is the education system and the wolf is COVID-19. If our education system was the way that it should have been in the first place, COVID-19 would not have shown us the things that we see today. And so I think that there's so many things that have to be fixed and so many issues that have to be addressed. But these issues cannot be addressed if we are so scared of actually addressing them because of this idea of we fear what new normalcy is supposed to look like. Because society is supposed to progress. And if we fear progress, then I don't think our education system is ever going to change. But luckily, we find ourselves in a new generation of people who are hell-bent on ensuring that this system does not stay the way that it is. And I think COVID-19 showed that. Because for so long have we been keeping the system the way that it is, because we say it benefits these people and these other people, it does not benefit them, and so we do not care. But we find that because it does not benefit everybody else, it always ends up biting our society back in the behind in the end. Because think about all the money that we have had to disperse during COVID-19. All of the people who have been living in fear during COVID-19 of crime, all of the shootings and stuff that have risen because of the fact that people are not living in neighborhoods in which they're being given the resources that they need. Students are not being kept, I guess, busy because of the fact that they're not even able to go to school because they don't have the laptops that they need. I think COVID-19, the only thing that it showed in my eyes is the fact that, one, if we as a society are not willing to show everybody that they are worthy of being educated, that what matters is their potential and not their skin color or how much money they have, it will always end up hurting us in the end. There is no such thing as one group forever benefiting and one group forever hurting. The more hurt a group is, the more they end up hurting society in the end. And so I think that we are doing the fight that should have been done a long time ago, by fighting for a system that is not just about helping people who are underserved, but by showing other people that by being overserved, they always end up being underserved in the end.
Thank you. So powerful. Makitsli, you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. I think personally, reflecting on my own experience during this time and during this pandemic, and reflecting on my education and how it's shifted, I started my higher education journey at my local community college and transferred this past year into a four-year university. So reflecting on that whole experience of one, just all the emotions of not being able to celebrate this incredible accomplishment and really acknowledging it as an accomplishment, because for so long I felt so much shame around choosing to go to a community college. I think having the space to be able to write and also share out what that experience was looking like for me helped a lot in being able to also know that I wasn't the only one experiencing grief in a different way. So I think coming back to in-person spaces and transitioning back into the classroom, it's been a moment for me where I've really had to see that, one, all of us do not learn the same, and really being able to be rooted in that, of knowing that students should have the accessibility and the time to be able to learn how they learn best. I think we saw that in this virtual space. For me personally, I knew that being virtual was not something that I enjoyed and that I would thrive in. And so having acknowledged that, I think it really was a reflection of also the system of like, oh, why didn't I know this earlier in my academics and in my education? I wish I would have. So I think being able to really stay grounded in that, in our fight for education justice and equity at the end of the day is big. And I think also the accessibility aspect of knowing that so many students have had to learn how to utilize technology in their families as well. Think about so many younger students who have had to adjust to being on Zoom and typing in the Zoom ID, and how if they didn't have that support in their household, they were really the ones to take that on. And how do we create transitions like this to be smoother? And I think it's really just shown again at the end of the day that COVID really just amplified all of the inequities that we've had. And I think we all know that, we all see that. I think it's a matter of really also bringing it to our decision makers to really tell them front and center that these are the issues that we've had. They are not new. They are generational issues, and how do we create a change now, given that we're given the opportunity to do that? So how do we create spaces to where they're new and innovative, and also acknowledge the fact that there was no normal before. The environments that we were in were not normal. The fact that our schools are set up to look like prisons are not normal. So I think really being able to look at the fact that there is an opportunity for change. Change is needed. Change has been needed. So I think being able to really acknowledge that for what it is.
Thank you. I'm struck by the way you talk about grief and shame, and want to do a quick plug. In the midst of school closures, our team at Kentucky Student Voice launched a study and garnered almost 13,000 responses from students across the state. I think one of the major findings, and we're not the only people saying this at all, but there was an over 50% increase in our research participants of the students that wanted but lacked access to mental health services. The need is immense right now. And I know personally, so many of us on this call even have experienced the draining nature of the past year, and that they're having resources available to us, just need for that and the power of that cannot be underestimated. And I also think the frame that we're hearing so many people revert back to of thinking about learning loss and not other kinds of loss, not social loss, not the loss of family members, not the loss of homes in some cases, or the loss of routine and friendships. That where's that loss in the narrative? And so I think just coming back to that, and there's such an opportunity for schools to lean into a kind of just more real understanding of the kinds of losses that we've experienced. Yvonne, you have not answered this question, right?
Yeah, I have not yet. I've been taking notes on the things that everybody's been saying, because it's been so like interesting to hear these various perspectives tie into, you know, the things that I'm thinking about. And what struck me particularly was, Sokhnajara, your amazing analogy about the Three Little Pigs, and the fact that like that COVID didn't create anything. And then also thinking about, Salma, what you said about funding as an allocation of our values. It reminds me sort of like what I was saying during my intro when I changed schools in high school, and I showed up in this new school, and it was the first year, and I was part of like the first graduating class, and I was so amazed by, you know, having a maker space with sewing machines that I could use it whenever I wanted, and like rooms that I could walk freely through without a bell schedule stopping me from walking between rooms. You know, it was this wild feeling. And I remember talking to my principal, and I asked her, you know, where did all of this come from? Like, how did this like get here? I feel like I've never seen anything like this before. And she said to me, again, this was like 4 years ago, so the wording is a little, I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of, there's nothing here that wasn't here before. It's not like we never had the capacity to do this. We've always had the capacity to do this. The district just finally said yes. And it struck me how much power that a few people in our district building that was holed up in a couple streets over that never came to talk to us, like how much power they had over the educations we had. And it you know, this feeling of everything that we need is here. It's not like we approach education with this like scarcity mindset, that there's only so many resources, when in reality there are plentiful resources distributed so unevenly that we lose sight of the fact that everything we need is within us. Everything we need is around us. The earth is plentiful. You know, humans are resourceful. There's nothing that, you know, all of this feeling like that the world is scarce doesn't feel true to me, at least. And a lot of it, like everybody else has been saying, has to do with turning our focus towards like the needs of students, towards the needs of communities, and building communities that are based in empathy and culture and connection, and that value empathy, culture, and connection. And one thing that gives me hope, at least, as we transition away from the old normal, which isn't normal, like I mean, like you're saying, but into a world where like we have the resources to make our, you know, our schools places that we enjoy being, and make our educational experiences communities that feel loving and relevant to us. And that's the thing that I've enjoyed the most in the work that I do, is seeing how youth build their own spaces and students are able to build their own communities, that even in a world that feels so against us, there is this joy and healing and love between young people who understand your experience and are in it with you. And knowing that feeling and knowing that it's happened and it can continue to happen gives me a lot of hope for a transition into a world that we all want to live in.
Thank you so much. It has been such a joy to be in conversation with you all. I want to offer us a minute to think back to about a year ago. Our groups and many other youth-led education justice organizations came together to write a set of principles that we called Move School Forward. And although they are a little bit dated and they were written in a really different moment, when we didn't know much about COVID. Like, not sure that I was even, yeah, I don't know. We didn't know much. I was like, it was maybe the days of like wiping off the groceries, and we thought that surface spreading was a thing. But there's a lot of wisdom in those principles, and we spent a lot of time writing them. And I want to offer moveschoolforward.org as a spot for anyone who's watching to visit, revisit what we're saying and learn more, and also find ways to reach all of our groups and our websites, just as one centralized spot. So thank you so much for being in conversation, for being here, and for everyone for listening. This is truly just a kind of inflection point, I hope. And if not, we're going to make it so. So thanks again so much for being here, for your time, for your energy, and love. Have a good one.
Just extraordinary. I tell you, like, hearing these young voices speak and sharing their expertise and their knowledge and their insight, I'm like, oh, I get tingles, because I'm like, maybe school can get better. It doesn't matter for me. I'm grown. I'm finished. I'm never going back to high school ever. You couldn't pay me and put me in a time machine. I wouldn't go back there. But to think about future generations and what they might encounter, there were so many threads too that are starting to pop up between the different conversations. The thread of joy. We got a comment in the chat, a really great comment. Timikia SJ commented, this connection between the discussion of the importance of place is really resonating with the earlier conversation, and the need to emphasize how we can think of place and space differently. And I was even thinking about, so many of them shared their experiences of school, right? And I was thinking how, if you made it through school, especially public school, there was at least one teacher that you had a special relationship with, one teacher or guidance counselor who really made you felt understood and seen, and almost all of us have that person that we can name, that we still remember, maybe elementary school, maybe high school. But try to imagine an entire school that makes you feel understood and seen. I think that's the vision, that it shouldn't be this exception, or this one person who plucks you out, or like provides the safe space at lunch for you, but like your entire school should be doing that for you. So I just love these young folks and what they're doing, and understanding too that it is a long process. As much as young people are fired up and want change to happen now, it can definitely happen faster than it's happening, but we do understand that it is a process. And so I'm just grateful to be able to bear witness to this brilliance. For our final segment, we'll be hearing from Dr. Jeff Duncan-Andrade. He's a professor of ethnic studies at San Francisco State University, and he's speaking from his home in East Oakland, California, on the traditional lands of the Ohlone people. Jeff has been engaged in community responsive education for decades now. So we were curious about his thoughts about this particular moment. We reached out to him with this question. As you reflect upon the moment we're in, and knowing what you know about persistent inequity and disparate outcomes among young people in education, how can we do better? And here's what he had to say.
The work that I've done over the last 25 or 30 years in both in my community in Oakland, but also around the country and around the world, and the work of so many of the people that I respect has really focused on taking on that challenge and pushing our schools, and in the process our society, to confront its history, and to tell the truth about how we have ended up here, how we have ended up with such disparate life outcomes along predictors such as race and zip code. And I think that's why myself and many of my colleagues have really begun to narrow our focus and our position to one where we really believe that we need to repurpose public schools in this country. And that needs to be done at the local level, but I think it should be part of a national discourse. And we should be engaging a question in our local communities and nationally about why are we doing this? Why do we take children from their families at the age of 6 by law and send them to these institutions we call schools for 8 hours a day for 13 consecutive years? I think that the communities and the nation should be constantly asking itself that question. What is the purpose of public schools in a pluralistic multiracial democracy? And it is increasingly my sense and sensibility that the answer to that question is the wellness of our children. And sadly, that is rarely, if ever, the central focus of schools. And while I think schools do pay lip service to caring about the well-being of children, it often ends up being mostly just rhetoric, and it's not real in any way. It's not real in the curriculum. It's not real in the climate. It's not real in the culture that young people experience in schools. And I think probably the best indicator of that is that we don't measure wellness in schools. So we really don't have a sense about how well young people are when they come to us. And we don't have a sense if they're more well when they leave us. And I think that's a problem. And I think for me, it's a problem at multiple levels. So I'm a father of 2 school-aged children, and that's a problem for me that I'm not given any sort of promise or commitment from the schools where I send my children that they will return to me at the end of the day more well than when I drop them off. And I think that part of the reason for that is because we haven't had this purpose conversation, but also something that dawned on me several years ago when I was doing some work with a group of superintendents and principals, and we were having this conversation about equity and about wellness, and I sort of stopped in the middle of the conversation, and I said, I'm gonna pivot us a little bit right now in order to really focus our conversation. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to give you all what's called a forced choice survey. And if you're familiar with sort of survey methodology, a forced choice survey is one where you have a question and there's in the panel of answers that's available to choose from, there's often multiple good answers. And so the forced choice portion makes you prioritize. It makes you choose which of those good answers is best for you. And so I said, okay, so I'm going to give you all a forced choice survey. And it's a pretty simple survey. It only has one question, and there's only 2 choices. And so here it is. So option A is your child. And when I say your child, I mean not the children in the system that you serve or lead, right? But your actual flesh and blood child. And if you don't have any children, just pretend, okay? Just answer the question as if you were answering this question about your own child. So here it is. Option A, your child scores in the 90th percentile on all of the state and national standardized tests that your school gives. And they score in the bottom quartile on the national measurements of the medical measurements, the public health measurements of youth wellness. Or they score in the 90th percentile for all of the measurements of youth wellness, and they score in the bottom quartile for all of the state and national academic testing that you give. So how many of you choose option A? And none of them raise their hands. So how many of you choose option B? They all raise their hands. And I say, okay, good. Me too. And so my next question is, how do you measure that? How do you measure that in the schools that you lead? And none of them had any, good answers to that. A few of them, cited the Healthy Kids survey and, some other, but all of these surveys were really looking at some elements of wellness, but at the aggregate level, right? So they couldn't give me a wellness score. They weren't evaluating wellness for the individual child because it wasn't actually core to the agenda. And we measure what matters to us in schools, and kids know it. So we can tell children that we care about them all we want. We can tell them that we're going to be like a family and we love you and, we care about your well-being. But they know that at the end of the day, what we really care about is their reading, writing, and math scores, because that's what we're measuring. That's what we're tracking. That's what we're paying attention to. And that's why so many young people reject school. Because they know it's not really about their care. It's not really about their well-being. It's about preparing them to participate in an economy. Not even really civically or critically in the society, but just preparing them to either participate in the economy or preparing them to not be able to participate in the economy. And, young people are smart. Like they've sorted that out. I certainly sorted it out pretty early in my own schooling experience. So there's a mismatch, right, between the rhetoric of care, the rhetoric of community that is being sold in schools, and the reality that young people actually experience. And that discord doesn't just affect young people. It affects the adults in the building too. It affects the larger school community. So there's perhaps no better time, certainly in my lifetime, and certainly in my career as an educator and a researcher, for us to turn the focus to wellness than right now, because we are in pandemic and perhaps preparing to transition out. But I to be honest, I've been really somewhere between disturbed and disgusted. I've been involved in any number of conversations with districts and individual schools that are preparing to come back, sort of full boat in the fall, and it's really frustrated me and saddened me the lack of. I would even use a strong word. I would say the crisis of courage that I'm seeing in educational leadership. And, and the same breath, I want to say that what an incredibly challenging time to be an educational leader. Like, what a curveball that got thrown at the whole society, but at schools in particular, to try and sort out how we're going to continue to support young people. But this was the opportunity. This is the opportunity for us to repurpose schools, to fundamentally rethink, why are we doing this, and to center wellness as the core purpose of schools. And when I say that, I don't mean add a wellness program on. So many schools make this mistake, right? They want to, do equity better. They want to do culturally relevant, curriculum. They want to do restorative justice. They want to do ethnic studies. And the way they try to do it is they try to add it on to the plate. And the plates of schools and the plates of teachers and the plates of school leaders are already too full. And so when you add more onto a full plate, stuff falls off. And it's often the stuff that you just added on because it's on the top. And that's why so many of these efforts have failed, because they've been treated as programs. They're not fundamental. They're not foundational. And they're add-ons. And add-ons are the first things to go. So if we're going to do this, this is why the language that we've been using is to say that we want to have a conversation about literally repurposing schools, clearing the plate, and then putting at the center as the foundation an intentional focus on youth wellness, a promise to every single family that when you leave your child with us and turn your back and walk away, it is our promise that when we hand them back off to you, that they will be more well than when you left them with us. That's our promise. And you can teach every single content standard, right, through a commitment to wellness. You can get to those, but those are the vehicle through which you're achieving your mission, which is to make sure that every child is well and more well when they leave than when they walk through the door in the morning. And to be frank, as a veteran, teacher and school leader, it's impossible. You can't do that for every child every day, but that's okay. It's not about delivering on the promise every single day. It's about making the promise, making that the focus, making that the focus of how you staff, how you spend your resources, how you organize the school day, how you organize time, how you physically organize the building and the structure of the school, how you choose curriculum, how you choose assignments, how you choose assessments. I mean, everything, right, needs to narrow into that core purpose. And because, frankly, I'll just speak about my own children. I could care less if my sons can read, write, and do math at grade level if they're not well. And I know that if they're well, that the reading and the writing and the math will come along. The focus has to be on what any psychometrician, right, any medical doctor, any psychologist, any public health official, any social epidemiologist, any neurobiologist would tell you are the leading indicators of child development. The leading indicators of child development are the indicators of their well-being. And those are typically measured around 3 domains, right? They're measured around their inner self, right? Do they love themselves? We can go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when we do that, we want to make sure that we connect it to the Blackfoot origins, the indigenous Blackfoot origins, where he borrowed, right, that concept of a hierarchy of needs from, right? Because he borrowed that from the Blackfoot theory of the breath of life, which is as much connected to the wellness of the individual. And I think this is the gap that we've got to close, that schools are so focused on individual student achievement. I don't want us to focus on individual student wellness. I want us to focus on individual student wellness for collective wellness. I want us to focus on individual student reading for collective reading. Why? This is why young people ask us this all the time. Why are we doing this? And we never have a very compelling answer. Most of the answers we give them are either because, what my mom used to say to me, which is because I said so, or we offer them because, if you do this, then you can have a better life. You can have access to all these opportunities. Young people aren't buying it. They're not buying it. But if the reason for reading is so that you can help somebody else to read, if the reason for your wellness is so that you can contribute to the wellness of the community, now young people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. So this pivot towards, right, focusing on wellness has to also be a deeper pivot, a deeper examination about why. Why do we want young people to be well? And I don't mean that in a sort of like trite or like, that's not a, I'm not being dismissive with that question. I'm literally saying that to make this pivot, we would need to ask that question in earnest consistently, because then that determines the other things that we start adding back on the plate. That determines how we're spending our time, how we're setting up our school day, how we're supporting teachers, how we're recruiting teachers, how we're developing teachers, how we're choosing curriculum, what we're assessing, when we're assessing. Okay, so I believe fundamentally that we could pivot so much of the pain and the suffering that has happened from these multiple pandemics that this nation has been wrestling with in one generation. And we could do that by fundamentally rethinking the purpose of schools in this nation. And I believe that if we do that, that we have a fighting chance to become a truly pluralistic multiracial democracy. I also believe that if we don't, that we will tear ourselves apart at the seams. I mean, our public health data is shockingly bad. And given all of the resources that we pour into the healthcare industry, estimates as high as 10 to 20 times as much as the next highest paying country invests in its healthcare system, and yet we have poor health. Because when do you need the healthcare industry? You need the healthcare industry when you're already sick. We are not in good shape as a nation. And yet I am imminently hopeful, because every day that I show up at schools, I see young people that are so excited to be participating in the potential of this project. And over time, that excitement dwindles and it dies, because there's something wrong with the way in which we're doing school, something deeply, deeply flawed. And I think that has everything to do with us not taking the time to pause and have a purpose conversation, and to recenter our work with young people and families around their wellness. And what we know with incredibly high level of certainty is that what we are currently measuring in schools are what psychometricians would call lag indicators, right? Reading, writing, math, attendance, engagements with the disciplinary system, all of these things that we're testing and measuring in schools are lagging indicators of youth development. And we're chasing our tails because we're looking at all the wrong data. And the best you can do with lag indicator data is to guess, right? You can guess why those indicators or those scores on those lag indicators were not what you wanted them to be. And so you roll the dice, right? You guess, you roll the dice again, and you try something new, and it's not working, and it's never worked. It's never worked. Not in the aggregate. And sure, you can give me all kinds of anecdotal evidence and individual examples, but I'm talking about the system of public education. But it could work. And it could work if we turn the focus onto the leading indicators of youth development, which are the indicators of youth wellness. And because we know that when young people are well, I mean really well, in their inner self, in their interpersonal relationships, and in their interconnectedness, not only with each other, not only with their community, but with the land, with water, with air, with animals, when those connections are strong, then all of these other things that we're measuring, they come along in due time. And if you get lead indicator data and it's bad, like you're getting bad data back, bad meaning like a young person is not well, then you know what to focus on, because that's the lead indicator. And you don't focus on the reading score, you focus on their wellness. I've said for years that you win the heart to win the head. And the young people that are the most disconnected from school are the young people that are the most wounded and the most vulnerable. And wounded children and vulnerable children are not going to let you in their head. But we keep banging on their heads. We keep giving them more tutoring and more reading programs and more math programs. And if that was the solution, it would have worked. But it's not working because that's not the solution. And so we can bang on their heads all we want. They're not going to let us in, because when you are wounded, when you are vulnerable, the head is the last safe place you have. And so you're not letting anybody in there, particularly not grown folks that are connected to an institution that has probably already done you a bunch of harm. It's illogical to expect them to come to school and trust, unless school leaves their head alone and starts to work on their heart and just continues to massage the heart to find the medicine that creates the healing. Hurt people hurt people. Healed people heal people. And so you win the heart to win the head. And when schools become about that, then we've got a fighting chance to actually deliver on the promise of a pluralistic multiracial democracy, to actually deliver on a promise of a truly engaged, critical, democratic citizenry. But until we do that, then we're just playing games. We're moving deck chairs around on the Titanic, and it is going down. All of the data clearly indicates that it's not working and that we're in trouble. And so this is a phenomenally important time, a real moment where we could fundamentally consider what we do and start getting it right. And so I will end just by offering that I'm down to partner and work and conversate with anybody, because I certainly don't have it figured out. Right? But I know what we're doing is not working. And I know it doesn't have to be this way, because it can be another way. I've seen it. I've seen it in individual classrooms. I've seen it in programs. I just haven't seen it yet institution-wide or system-wide. But I know it's possible, because there's teachers doing it every day already. And we need to learn from those teachers. We need to lift up the lessons of those teachers, the mastery of their craft, and begin to think about how do we get more and more whole schools to secure that kind of experience for every child every day, to make that promise to children and families. And then when we don't deliver on that promise, because it is so hard, that it's not about changing the promise, right? It's about just acknowledging that we didn't deliver. And knowing that the next day when that child comes back, we've got to pour some extra medicine in. We've got to do some extra healing. That's all families really want from us. And it is my firm sense and sensibility that if we were to do that in our communities and as a nation, we would need to focus from the very beginning our efforts on getting it right with Black children and Indigenous children. And if we get it right with Black and Indigenous children, other children are going to be well. But we can't keep compartmentalizing them and leaving them as an afterthought or as a sideline. The last need to be first. And the two groups that this nation committed a genocide against need to be at the head of the line for the focused conversation, strategy, pivot, and change that happens in our schools if we're going to get it right. And if I can support you in any way on that journey, please do not hesitate to reach out. Because as I said, I certainly do not have it all figured out, but I am down to keep putting in the work to keep trying to figure this out so that we can get it right for all of our kids. Thank you.
Another powerful delivery of emotion and inspiration and information. So thank you, Dr. Duncan-Andrade, for those words and for that call to action, and also for putting yourself out there. Like, I don't know if you heard, but Jeff was like, call me, email me, let's talk, let's do this. And I think that's true of all of the speakers that we've heard today, that they're all open to continuing this conversation. I think it's vitally important. Just some of the things that come to mind, I was thinking about one of my favorite writers, Adrienne Marie Brown, who says, and I'm paraphrasing, but all organizing is science fiction because we're trying to bring about something that we've never seen. And so to hear Jeff talk about, even though I haven't seen it in a system, I know it's possible because I've seen it in a classroom, you know, and to think about like, how do we go from like the classroom to the school district, to the region, to the state, to the nation, that we start small and we just let all of our work ripple outward. And if we're doing that in key places at the same time, that's really powerful. And I think sometimes when we're doing this work as educators, as artists, in a system that seems so just walled and defensive and strong and permanent, like, well, it's been this way for decades, I guess it'll keep being this way. We've got to really remember our power that we have in our individual spaces. So whether that power is in a classroom or in a community center or in your home, you have that autonomy to create a place of joy and a place that feels just, where students can be heard. And that's really, really exciting. And that's what we want to focus on today. It has been a pleasure and delight to have you here at the 2021 Arts Summit. I want to thank all of my colleagues at the Kennedy Center. I want to thank Vanessa, Deborah Rutter, Jordan Lasalle, and everyone who contributed to making this happen. All of our speakers, thank you so much. And to you who are watching this and hopefully sharing this with your colleagues and continuing the conversation. There's a lot of work to be done, so we've got to roll up our sleeves, but I believe that we can do it and we can make education spaces beautiful, joyous, just spaces to believe.